So hello, everyone. Like I said, great to see a lot of familiar names here and some new ones. My name is Christina McDonald. I'm the host of the CIOOS Atlantic discussion series titled Exploring Ways to Bring Together Indigenous and Western Knowledge Systems for Coastal and Ocean Observing. And I'm speaking to you today from Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And I'm very sorry, I think that might be Katherine Martin calling. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, I'm speaking to you today from Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And we are honored that Elder Albert Marshall has joined us again today for the discussion. And I'm not sure if I see Elder Edward Purley on the call, but if you are there, Edward, it's an honor to have you here again, joining us. So today's discussion is the third and final discussion in the series. The first discussion took place on January 19th, and there, Katherine Martin, the Director of Community Indigenous Engagement for Dalhousie University, welcomed us to Mi'kma'ki. Elder Albert Marshall and Elder Edward Purley called on every one of us to step into our inherent responsibilities to care for the planet and not compromise it for the generations who come after us. Our second discussion on February 2nd focused on the legal, ethical, and value considerations that surround digitizing and sharing Indigenous knowledge and data. Christine McRae, Stephanie Russell-Carroll, Joel Heath, and Ken Paul all brought their experience and insights to bear on this. Today, we are looking at collaborations and the factors that contribute to successful collaborations between Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples and organizations when it comes to sharing knowledge. Recordings of all three discussions will be available on the CIOOS Atlantic YouTube channel. And Kieran, I'd now like to ask you just to walk us through a few housekeeping notes regarding the Zoom platform we are using today.
Yeah, so we're just going to take you through how to use the Zoom platform. So I just want to let you know that there is no wrong entry for questions. So you can either post your questions in the chat, either by clicking the chat in the meeting control bars on the bottom and then opening the chat window. You can raise your hand in Zoom by going to the More option and clicking Raise Hand. You can post in the chat via mobile, or you can just join the conversation by unmuting yourself or muting yourself or turning your video on and off. And if you have any technical difficulties today, please feel free to reach out to our event coordinators, Olivia Handspiker or Daniel Kite, and they'll be happy to help you with any technical difficulties. Pass it back to you, Sheena.
Thanks, Kieran.
How do you indicate if you want to ask a question? Like myself now, I cannot go into that chat box. What must I do if I have a point or if I have a question?
Yeah, so you...
Since I cannot go into that chat box.
Okay, if you don't want to use the chat box, you can either use the raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen, or you can simply unmute yourself and we can monitor the room for that, and we will know when you've unmuted and we can make sure that your question will be answered.
You know, it's not a question whether I want to use it or not. I just can't. I don't know how.
Okay. No worries.
And that kind of makes me feel that I sort of a disadvantage because I don't want to interject.
Okay.
Now, how does somebody who is on the phone ask a question, who doesn't have access to all these links?
Yeah, so if you are on mobile, you can just feel free to unmute yourself and we can make sure that your question is answered. We will be monitoring the room to see who unmutes themselves, and whoever does will be asked to present their question.
So I think that's Elder Albert Marshall who's asking raising this point. And so Albert, if you're not able to see those options that Kieran has outlined for you, I know you've expressed reservation about just jumping in. unmiking yourself, but that may be the best of the options for you at this point. So could I suggest that you do that, and I can keep an eye on your screen if you would
Yes.
like to at any point.
Yes, I appreciate it, but I don't want to feel I'm pulling ranks here.
Yeah. Well, there's no wrong entry. So any of those options are equally acceptable in this discussion today. So please don't feel like you're pulling rank. And Elder Edward Purley, I can see you there. Wonderful to have you here. So Albert, I hope you feel you can speak when you would like to speak. That's all of the above is totally acceptable here. No wrong entry. So I would now like to, so the session is going to run approximately 2 hours, concluding at 3 p.m. Atlantic Standard Time. And I would now like to turn things over to Katherine Martin, who has joined us to welcome greetings from those of you in attendance who would like to share them. And please, Pisces, if you can help me monitor the room here to make sure that everyone who wishes to share has the opportunity. Katherine, are you there? If you are, please unmute your mic. I did admit you not too long ago, so I think you are in the room.
Yep, I'm here.
Great.
I'm just looking for my drum. Okay.
I'm glad I don't have to sing.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad I have to sing because that's what I can do for you. Other things, not so much. Hi, Albert. Hi, Ed. All right. Oh, gosh, I can't do that. Sorry about that. I will be with you in a second. Been a busy day already. Oops. Okay. I'm trying to take, okay. There. Welcome, everybody. There, I did it. I'd like to welcome everybody to the unceded territory of our ancestors, the Mi'kmaq. And well, it's a very beautiful day here because we only have rain. We're not having all that freezing rain that everybody else has. I'd like to thank you for asking us to come again and be part of this beautiful session that you're having, and thank Christina for keeping us all informed and in line. I'd like to sing a chant that I often was taught by Sarah Denny to sing whenever we gather. There are other reasons for this, and Albert so eloquently explained it to us the other day. Guano de, guano de, guano de, guano danai, guanalia, guano danai, guanalia, guano danai, guanalia, guano de, guanalia, guano de, guanalia, guano da. Guanalia, guanodanai, guanalia, guanode, guanalia, guanode, guanalia, guanoda. Walalio. And before we finish, I'd like to ask if we could ask for greetings from our elder Albert Denny from Eskasoni, and also mention that when I was drumming, I thought of the people in Texas today, and especially in Austin, where they have a deep freeze and they're not used to it. And I think it's like 20 below, and they really need prayers right now because it's quite devastating. So I'm thinking of them, and I'm asking everybody to, send good thoughts their way. Walalio. Albert?
Let me say an opening prayer, do you?
I would love that if you don't mind.
Yeah, all right then. Creator, I come before you in a humble way. I thank you for this day. I give thanks for the 4 directions and the 4 winds. I give thanks for allowing me one more day to walk upon my mother, the earth. Creator, I give greetings to Mother Earth. I ask her to continue to sustain me in all other life. I tell her one day my body will return to her. Creator, I give thanks and give greetings to Grandfather Sky. I give great thanks for the warm Father Sun brings as he travels from the east to the west. I give thanks for the light that allows me to see the great beauty of Mother Earth. Creator, I give thanks and ask you to watch over my relatives, the 4-legged. I give thanks for what they have given us. Creator, I give thanks for the birds, the winged ones. I give thanks for the beauty and songs that fill the air. I honor the trees and the herbs, plants and herbs that hold so much knowledge of life and are our guardians. I give thanks for all they have taught us, and still today they continue to teach. Creator, for the water, the giver of life, I give great thanks indeed. I give thanks for all that is on, above, and upon Mother Earth. Now, Creator, my most humble prayer is for the 2-legged, the human beings. They are out of balance and need to return to the old ways to find love, harmony, peace, and spiritual awakening. I ask you, Creator, to reach down and touch our hearts so that we can all still live a good life before the pathway of this life is no more. Creator energies, accept my love. Continue to walk with me upon this pathway and help me in my work. For it is the work of every human being to help and to love each other. We give great thanks indeed. I'm so Nogama.
Love.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Elder Albert Marshall. And thank you all for joining us today from across the country and around the world. The focus of today's discussion is collaborations. And we have a number of guest speakers joining us today who are going to tell us about the collaborative knowledge sharing work they are leading. And I'm really looking forward to hearing from all of our guest speakers. But before I introduce our first guest speakers, I wanted to speak briefly about the Canadian Integrated Ocean Observing System, or CIOOS, and the collaborations that make CIOOS possible. CIOOS is a national initiative to increase discovery of, access to, and reuse of coastal and ocean data. CIOOS does not collect ocean data ourselves, but instead we collaborate with those that do hold and gather this kind of knowledge. We understand that not all data can or should be made publicly available. And through discussions like this one, we are learning about ways that we can work together to manage access to knowledge and advance our shared goals when it comes to our coasts and oceans. And we are all connected by the oceans. And I recently came across a map projection that is really neat, and it is all about the oceans. And I wonder now, Kieran, whether you might put up that slide now. That's not the right slide. It's the one that I sent you earlier today. It's got a strange map of the world on it.
Apologies, I'm sourcing that now.
I shouldn't say strange, it's just different. There it is. Perfect. Thank you. So this is a slide. This is a map that I came across recently that focuses on the oceans, and it's called the Spillhouse Projection. And it was authored by a South African American geophysicist and oceanographer called Athelstan F. Spillhouse in 1942. And I think this map really emphasizes our connectivity around the world, and it helps to dissolve the land-based boundaries that can so often divide us. So take a minute there. It's a very different way of looking at our planet. And I think given our shared interests in our oceans, it's a very powerful way to reimagine how we're all connected. So we'll leave that up for the time being. And so CIOOS has established partnerships with a number of organizations across the country and beyond who are guiding how we develop. And a number of the CIOOS staff and our partners have joined us on the call today. And I'd like to invite them now to just very quickly introduce themselves. Some have indicated that they'd like to introduce themselves, and others have indicated that they prefer to listen. So I'd like to start with those from CIOOS Atlantic. So those team members who have worked with me to organize this series, amongst many other things. So I would invite the CIOOS Atlantic folks to introduce themselves now, and we'll do it sort of roughly alphabetically. So I'll just put you on the spot there and see if you can all figure it out. I think that means we start with Alexi. So Alexi, would you start by introducing yourself, please?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming today to the session. My name is Alexi Backerdax Westcott, and I work with Christina in Nova Scotia with CIOOS Atlantic, and I'm an engagement specialist here. And I guess I'll pass it on to the next person.
Kelly, let's hear from you next, please.
I guess I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. Again, thanks so much for joining us. I'm Kelly Santos. I'm an engagement specialist with CIOOS Atlantic as well, and I'm based in St. John's, Newfoundland. I'll pass it on to, I believe Shayla is with us as well. Shayla.
Oh, you're on mute, Shayla.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. Welcome again, and thanks for coming. My name is Shayla Fitzsimmons. I'm the Executive Director of CIOOS Atlantic, and I'm based in Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Thanks, Shayla. Fred, Fred has also indicated his interest in introducing himself. On to you, Fred.
You twisted my arm to do this.
Yeah.
I'm Fred Worski. I'm with the Ocean Tracking Network as the Executive Director. We run systems, electronic systems to monitor ocean conditions and also to track fish in the world. We are here as a partner in one of the major projects you'll hear about today. But broader we serve stakeholders in the aquatic world. And I cannot think of a bigger failure for the Ocean Tracking Network if we failed to serve Canada's rights holders in the work that we're doing. So we're looking very much forward to continuing to develop our relationships here. Thank you.
Thanks, Fred. Mike, are you there?
I am indeed. Hi, I'm Mike Smith. I'm one of the co-leads for CIOOS Atlantic and the co-chair of the technical committee nationally, and so delighted to have the chance to learn from everyone through this series and today.
Thanks, Mike. Jeff, did you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Jeff Cullis, Technical Director with CIOOS Atlantic, so based at Dalhousie in Halifax as well. So yeah, great to see all of you.
Thanks, Jeff. And that may be all from CIOOS Atlantic. I can certainly, I'll open it up to anyone I've forgotten right at the end. Is there anyone from the St. Lawrence Global Observatory that would like to introduce themselves? If so, please mute yourself. Okay, let's move on. I know there's a couple folks from CIOOS Pacific who are on the line here. Margo, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Margo Hessin-Lewis. I work with Pieter Romer as a team working with Indigenous communities on the Pacific Coast, doing a lot of interfacing between CIOOS and community needs. And I'm a marine ecologist with the Hakai Institute. We have a couple of other people from Hakai joining today as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Margo. Do any of your colleagues wish to introduce themselves? If so, please unmute yourself and step up to the mic. Okay, great. Well, thanks everyone to those who
Christina, you just muted yourself there.
I sure did. Thanks, Mike. So thanks all for introducing yourselves there. There may be others on the line that I've skipped over, but I wanted to give the attendees here the opportunity to meet others who are engaged in this work from across the country. So thanks all for introducing yourselves. So without further ado, I'd like to start with introduce our first guest speakers. So I am very excited to have a team of 4 individuals speaking to a collaboration taking place in Atlantic Canada. Abaganama-Tultig is Mi'kmaq for We Help Each Other, and this is an NSERC-funded project that enables collaborative stewardship through a holistic partnership that includes Mi'kmaq knowledge holders, local harvesters, academic researchers, and government scientists. Shelley Denny is from the Mi'kmaq community of Potlatech and is Director of Aquatic Research and Stewardship at the Unama'ki Institute of Natural Resources. Shelley will be speaking along with Skylar Jador from the Mi'kmaq community of Eskasoni, and Skylar is the project's community liaison and field technician for the Brador Lake. Alana Silaboy is the Mi'kmaq Knowledge and Community Engagement Manager with the Mi'kmaq Conservation Group. And Darren Porter is a commercial harvester and founder of MINUS, the Marine Institute of Natural and Academic Science. And Darren is instrumental in helping with the Bay of Fundy work. So thank you to our first round of guest speakers. And Kieran, if you could pop up that slide for Abaganama-Tultig, and we'll pass the mic over to you, Shelley.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today. As introduced, my name is Shelley Denny, and I'm Mi'kmaq. I do have affiliations with Potlatech, but I've been living in Eskasoni for a long time, so I do consider myself a resident today. But I would like to speak on the topic of project governance, in particular, when trying to integrate knowledge systems and trying to enhance partnerships through tried seeing. As an idea borrowed from social science, participatory research is an important step in shaping how Indigenous peoples can be partners in projects funded by programs that may not necessarily allow for Indigenous peoples as partners. As such, we're often in the position of collaborators as we don't have those academic credentials as researchers or organizations, but we do consider ourselves assets. Because collaboration with Indigenous peoples is often one of the reasons why projects do get funding. But we also bring different ways of doing things that others could benefit from, a unique perspective, if you will, that other partners may not have. Unfortunately, we've had previous experience where our concerns or ideas were not respected, and they didn't fall into the Western way of conducting research. As a result, we're very particular in our involvement in projects, who are our partners and how we're portrayed. But we're changing that. Using a steering committee, project governance is shared. We're not saying that we hold all the power. Rather, our concerns are taken into consideration, deliberated, and decisions are made with our input. Mi'kmaq people contribute in meaningful ways to determining what research questions are and how the research is undertaken. And this is very important to us, as there's differences in values underpinning what we need to know and why, and how the research must have minimal impact to the environment or to the research species. Our project is about helping each other, and this includes helping each other understand that knowledge systems guide and shape people and organizations. Sometimes it just takes another idea or another way of doing things that may be out of the box, but still reasonable. And sometimes it just takes more time or uses a different method or technology. But that's innovation and respecting our values as Mi'kmaq people. This also holds for communication. All communication is co-developed. Placement and portrayal of our involvement cannot be the afterthought. It must be highlighted and portrayed as equals in the research relationship. While this is a tracking project for culturally relevant species in 2 distinct locations, the project is more than that. It's about different knowledge systems coming together for mutual benefit and understanding. For this reason, the project name reflects the people approach rather than the scientific understanding that will be gained. Another idea borrowed from social science, in particular the Fishwicks project, the Fisheries Western Indigenous Knowledge Systems, is the integration of a community liaison. Working with Mi'kmaq fishers is quite different from working with commercial fishers. As needs-based fishers, when they fish is not based on a commercial season. Mi'kmaq rights, for example, allows for greater flexibility when fish can be harvested, but there's a wealth of knowledge in the distribution of species throughout the year. So rather than using technicians to capture our samples, we've integrated Mi'kmaq knowledge into the research design, but we've also incorporated a community liaison to coordinate sample collection with Mi'kmaq traditional harvesters. The community liaison is more than a sample coordinator. There are opportunities built within the project for capacity building. And I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce Skylar Jador, our community liaison, to speak about his role in the project. Skylar?
Thank you, Walalio, for letting me to speak on behalf of the Labuan Maruti part of the project. I am the liaison for the Bedore Lakes side of the Labuan Maruti project, and my role is to have community engagement, like be able to speak to the other communities in Unamagi around the Bedore Lakes, and have communication with the fishers, and we contract the fishermen to catch the eels for us and the lobsters in the Bedore Lakes that we tag. And also, like an example, we have recently with the lobster that's been happening in Southwest Nova Scotia, I was able to talk to all the commercial fishermen in the Bedore Lakes, and everything was good anyways, and they were happy to work with us so that nothing bad would happen. And I guess having a Mi'kmaq speaker as the community liaison was much easier for me to communicate better with the right holders that fish for us in the Bedore Lakes. And yeah, it was pretty interesting that first time, because I find that they were all eager to work with us. But there was also it was pretty interesting when we first started. They said it's going to be like a capacity building role, and it started off as we're just tagging the fish, but it eventually it turned out that I learned a lot from both sides of the knowledge systems. For example, we did a lot of field work at the beginning. We did some ROV, which was pretty cool, and all this stuff I never would have thought I would work with, and also collecting data for the Dell team and writing everything down. But I also learned a lot from the local knowledge from the fishermen, like their cues, like when to start harvesting eels. They said that when the spring peepers start peeping, the little frogs, that's when the eels come out of the mud. And they also said not to fish after it thunders because the eels get wasit, which means frisky, or what do you call it? Like quick reflexes. They're really essentially scared of light, so it makes eeling pretty impossible. And well, fishing for lobster, and when it's really warm out, you can get them shallower. Then when it gets cold, then you go deeper. And they also use the shoreline for an example where to catch their lobster. Once they start seeing boulders on the shoreline, then they know that's a good spot to fish them. But it was really interesting with learning from both ways, from both knowledge systems. And I'll pass the mic to Alana.
Well, and Skylar. So hi, everybody. My name is Alana Sillaboy. I'm from the Sabaganegity First Nations in the district of Sabaganegity. So my role is the community liaison for this project. I work for the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq. I am the Mi'kmaq Knowledge and Community Engagement Manager there. I've been involved with this project from the start. It was a little bit scary at first to take on such a huge project. I was excited and nervous at the same time, just because there was so many great opportunities presented with this project. So my role as the community liaison has been great. You know, learning from our other project partners and everybody involved in the project. It's great, and it's nice to see that knowledge exchange. It's going both ways, like Skylar said, you know, it's not us as Mi'kmaq people teaching these organizations all of our knowledge and ways and worldviews. It's us too, we're learning from them by using the ROVs and the BROVs. We just learned how to use the BROV a couple of weeks ago, which is great. You know, I got to go to PEI and learn how to do fish surgeries, because I don't have a science background, but they're building that into me. So I see that the two-eyed seeing portion of this project working, whether it's for myself or for other people in the project, but it is working within this project. And you know, it's easier for, I think, us to absorb the knowledge from the science side, and it takes a little bit longer for our science people and our technicians to learn the Mi'kmaq side of view, or the point of view. But there's value in both of these knowledge systems. They tend to strengthen and complement each other in a lot of ways. You know, science is saying one thing, and Mi'kmaq ecological knowledge and traditional knowledge is saying another, and they strengthen the knowledge, and it helps with this project to move forward. And you know, our side of the group, you know, a lot of the knowledge is different just because it's a different part of Nova Scotia and a different body of water. So a little bit of the information from Unamagi is going to be different than here on the mainland. So it's a good way to see how similar things are. And I like the fact that we we have a voice, and we are given that value of being equals, and our partners are willing to learn, and they're willing to teach. So I think being a community liaison, and that's nice because I get to go into our working group who guide us on the work that we do and where we should put our sensors and our fish, the information about our fish, which is Atlantic Tompod. They give us the Mi'kmaq ecological and traditional knowledge with around these fish that allows us to go out and fish them and research them. So yes, I love this project. It's one of my favorite things I get to do, and it's just the knowledge exchange is it's priceless, really. So yeah. So thank you, and I'll pass it to Darren.
Good day, everybody. I believe am I unmuted?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Thank you very much for having me today, and like you respect everybody on the phone. I'll try not to cover what the 3 people before me did, because they did a wonderful job of explaining their side of it, and I agree with everything they said. I like to step back a bit. This is my favorite of the collaborative projects I'm involved in, because they communicate so well. It's been very well done, as Shelley Denny mentioned, and it's the biggest part of it is communication. There's also respect, understanding, and sometimes giving up control from the academic side is extremely hard, because that is who's led science for so long. And I think she brought up control too. It's very important to not have somebody controlling these partnerships. Absolutely. We speak a different language in many ways, even if we all speak English or whatever language we speak. An academic speaks through the academic knowledge system that they learned, and most academics have spent many years studying their knowledge system, but not many years studying traditional or local or Indigenous knowledge systems. So it's very rare to have people cross over. So saying that, if you haven't crossed over, you shouldn't judge another system as not being adequate or sufficient to yours, because we're all different. We all have different ways of understanding. A fisherman or an Indigenous person, in many cases, that is fishing on the water, they see it as a big giant puzzle that's perhaps fuzzy, and whereas an academic's looking at a piece of a puzzle and they're trying to define that piece and bring clarity to it. That's probably the easiest way I can explain the difference. Also with this project, I like to note something that Skylar touched on. Whereas Skylar was brought into this project on a different approach, which I think should be thought of across the country. This started here, in my opinion. Whereas instead of looking for an Indigenous individual that has credentials through a university, perhaps go into the communities and look for individuals that want to have credentials someday in a two-eyed seeing approach as they learn the academic procedures. Instead of just looking for one that already has been in the system, look for somebody that wants to be in the system. That's another beautiful thing that this project has changed a bit. This is, I think, my 6th project working with academics in Mi'kmaq and local fishermen that I've been a part of and a partner in. And I will say it's progressed quite a ways. I follow this stuff across the country, and I believe in Nova Scotia we're leading this. We're refining it, and the rest of the country's trying to do this, as well as other parts of Nova Scotia. And there's a benefit to it that a lot of people don't see, that I've seen because I've been involved in so many of them, is that at the end we all usually agree, which is odd in our world today. But I'm a commercial fisherman. I'm also a spokesman for the Upper Bay of Fundy commercial fishery. And we all know the problems we're having in Nova Scotia between the commercial fishery and the Indigenous fishery in Southwest Nova Scotia and other places. If we were to pursue this in more areas, site-specific areas, I believe that the you know, when you start to know people and you start to understand people and you respect people, you work with people, the science changes the outlook because you're interacting with people you normally don't interact with. And it's a very good tool. I can remember the beginning of this project, Fred, that's on the phone from OTN, he said, well, you know, he was trying to figure out how to start some work with acoustics with First Nations. And I just made a simple phone call to my contacts at MCG. They were super excited. Fred was super excited. It was a simple hookup, but nobody knew how to talk. Nobody knew how to cross those imaginary lines to communicate properly. These projects open doors, more so even than just the science they come up with. They're opening doors of communication, respectful communication. This project has really done a good job of taking the control and dividing it equally and properly and giving everybody a say respectfully, and not just listening to them just to listen. They're actually working with, you know, like Shelley Denny said, when she brings up something or somebody brings up something, they actually, you know, respectfully don't have to listen to it. But in all honesty, in most cases in the study, we've moved like water, and we've evolved with everybody's input. And I don't think there's a situation where anybody's been unhappy with that. And that just shows it can be done. And I think we're honestly leading the country. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. There's a lot more to be said, but of course, being a local person, we don't talk in Twitter, we talk in giant fuzzy puzzles. So if you understand what I'm saying. Thank you. Well,
Fantastic. Thank you all so much. We now have some time for a Q&A from the audience, about 10 minutes. And so if anyone would like to comment or has a question for our guest speakers here, please either indicate in the chat box, raise your hand, or just simply unmute yourself and talk into your mic. Albert has a question or comment.
Yes,
Please
I'd
go
like
ahead.
to make some observations of what was said today. In the last 30 some odd years, since we've been trying to bring awareness, the importance of water, oceans, and so on, from our perspective, I think it was obvious to learn that there is a challenge between traditional knowledge versus scientific knowledge. Sometimes when you're trying to bring awareness of an issue, it's impossible to rely on scientific knowledge because these big corporations, they have so many corporate scientists. They can load up the court time, etc., with all these different arguments, and you'll never get your case heard properly. But when you apply traditional knowledge, which is really very practical, I like to share with you two cases. One was the seismic testing that was done very close to the shore of Cape Breton. The scientific arguments, the judge would not help him to make a decision, but rather when the traditional knowledge and the practical points were brought to him, that conjunction was favored in our favor. The other one, of course, would have been the Middle Shore case, in which a big mining company wanted to dredge the entrance of the Bador Lakes. Again, the scientific facts or knowledge did not sway the judge in any shape or form. It wasn't until the traditional knowledge or the practical side of argument that was presented, again, made him to make that decision the way he did, which was he grant us an injunction in our favor. So again, these are the observations I am making, that the scientific knowledge alone will not dissuade anyone that is committed of compromising the integrity of the very source of life in which we all depend upon. So I would like to suggest or to encourage that, yes, we need scientific knowledge. And I think if we can use it in conjunction with the traditional knowledges, which are very, very practical, in which it could really lead people to see why would it be so important of saving something such as a life source like water or oceans. I think that will go much further of trying to get a buy-in from the general populace, because right now the scientific argument that the corporate scientists put forth, we could never afford to counter those arguments because they got so much money. So anyway, as a suggestion, I wish there was a way in which these two concepts could be embraced. These two concepts could be used to raise the awareness of why the source of life should be protected, because this issue is not a regional issue, it's not a national issue, it is a global issue. Therefore, it's going to require the best minded and compassionate people from a global community for us to convey the kind of a message that needs to be conveyed, and that is, we have to go all out trying to protect the very source of life in which we all depend upon. Because if we don't, what chance will we have? Well, audio.
Would any of our guest speakers like to speak to Albert's comment there?
If I may.
Please go ahead, Darren.
I agree 100% with Albert Marshall, which I respect deeply. I'd like to add to it, a lot of the problem I've seen over the years, trying to work my way into the academic community and the Indigenous community respectfully, is we sometimes, not so much the Indigenous community and the local knowledge holders, but the barrier between us and the academics is sometimes simpler than what people see. And what I see is in the academic community, and I mean no offense, is the purpose or the outcome is about products. It's papers or students to get their degrees on their studies, and they're working on a single piece of a puzzle. Whereas, as Albert said, globally, this is a problem we need to, work on our life source and our stuff like that. An Indigenous knowledge holder or local knowledge holder or traditional, we're looking at a big puzzle and how it moves together. And perhaps our pieces are fuzzier, but our goal isn't a product. Our goal isn't a student. Our goal is preservation. And that's the way I see it as a local knowledge holder. My goal when I enter these studies is to preserve and protect for future generations, as most Indigenous knowledge holders are as well, and other local knowledge holders. We're not producing products. We don't have the interest so much as producing products like students and papers, even though we understand the value. Thank you.
Christina, you're muted right now, sorry.
I think I would have it figured out by now. We have a question from Pieter Romer in the chat to our guest speakers, and who have clearly been involved not just with the Abugnamatultik project, but other projects. So Pieter Romer asks, what is the best example of Indigenous engagement you've experienced with scientists and why?
Hi, Shelley here. I think that, this is probably the better example of engagement. in a natural science project for sure. In social science, it would have been the Fishwicks project through Dalhousie as well, largely because Fishwicks was participatory and this was modeled after that. And Dalhousie University really accommodated our perspective and our need to have a partnership approach in the project. So they're willing to accommodate us in that way and to bring forward the project governance the way we would like to have it.
Sorry.
Would anyone else, thanks Shelley, would anyone else like to speak to Peter's question?
Not questioning the integrity of science, but what I'm seeing mostly, science is very efficient of dealing and uncovering facts. Whereas traditional knowledge is really specialized in insights. The relationship to something else. And I think this is what Western science is missing. And I hope one day that they will begin to at least listen and hear what we're trying to say. Unless they are willing to find a way as to how they can integrate the spiritual domain element into Western science, then I think science will be that much more effective than what it is now.
Thank you, Albert. And we have a comment from our Teddyman in the chat box that I think speaks to your point about relationship and not focusing on the products. And our Teddyman says, for me, it is the bringing together of head, heart, and hands. So thank you, Shelley, Skylar, Alana, and Darren. Thank you very much for your presentation today. And we will now be moving on to our next guest speakers. Can we actually have a round of applause for the team there? Thank you.
Thank you, Christina.
Thank you.
So our next presenter, Pieter Romer, descends from the Nisga'a Wolf Clan and from Frisians, and is the Indigenous Community Liaison with Ocean Networks Canada. Pieter will be sharing with us about his work on Canada's West Coast as a liaison between coastal Indigenous communities and ONC's science and technology teams. Pieter will be speaking to how ocean observatories provide coastal Indigenous communities with the data they need to make informed decisions about their local ocean environment. So welcome, Pieter. I will pass the mic over to you, and don't forget to unmute yourself.
Thank you. I'll share my screen. Does everybody see my presentation okay? So, before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge and respect the Songhees, the Esquimalt, and the Wasanish peoples on whose traditional territories the university stands on today. Songhees and Esquimalt together are known as the Lekwungen people, who make up the 7 family groups. Lekwungen means people of the smoked herring. They are the original inhabitants of what is known today as Victoria. Yeah, please enter into the chat box which Indigenous territory you're participating from today. That'd be great. And if you don't know, research it. That'll be awesome. We got lots of time. So yeah, again, hello and welcome. I'm the Indigenous Community Liaison for Ocean Networks Canada. I've been part of ONC for 2 years. Ocean Networks is a nonprofit who is also part of the University of Victoria. I also been a television producer for 20 years. 100% of my work has been documenting Indigenous across Canada. Some of the programs have been on CBC, CTV, and APTN. My native name is Wa'asamgan, meaning wooden bowl. I am Niska'a in Frisian, as mentioned. Niska'a means people of the Nass River, and I'm from the Lachibu clan or Wolf clan in northern BC. My mother is a Niska'a and my father is Dutch. On both sides of the family, we come from a long line of fishermen and sailors. My Frisian grandfather was a captain of a 14,000-ton ship called My Lady that delivered paper around the world. I grew up on a commercial fishing vessel called the Serenade. In the summer, we trolled for salmon on the west coast of Vancouver Island between Brooks Peninsula and Cape Scott. On the right is my dad, Gerard, the Dutch captain, and as you can see our boat, the Serenade, it's the Dutch orange color, and that boat kept me safe for 20 years, and I lived in the forecastle of that boat. As we never had a house, the boat was always my home. So in the presentation roadmap, I'll be just go over briefly with what Ocean Network Canada does, Indigenous partnerships, and Ocean Obs 19. So at Ocean Networks Canada, we have a diversity of high-tech equipment to better understand our oceans. In this picture is ROPOS, which is a very sophisticated ROV, or remote operated vehicle that's conducting maintenance on one of our cabled observatories. At ONC, we have all kinds of high-tech for monitoring our oceans. Our observatories monitor everything from sound, visuals, to physical and chemical water properties, such as temperature, tides, and acidification, and much, much more. All of our observatories are cabled, as I mentioned. Connecting the ocean to the internet enables scientists, educators, policymakers, and researchers anywhere in the world to have real-time access to the deep sea from our webpage, Oceans 2.0, ONC's Advanced Data Management System. Data is freely available for viewing from any of our observatories 365 days in the year, 24/7. Our largest observatory is 800 kilometers long, called Neptune, ranging in depth from 23 meters to over 2,600 meters. Neptune spans a wide range of ocean environments, from the wave-dominated coast to gas-venting seafloor areas to deep water hydrothermal vents. This observatory helps with hundreds of scientific tests, such as understanding earthquakes. And we've had the consent of the New Chalmers, where this observatory lies. Our more common observatory is called a community observatory. As you can see, there are a diversity of sensors for monitoring, such as the HD camera, I believe is 4K actually now. The A-frame platform, this A-frame platform is in Cambridge and Nunavut. Ryan Flagg, our community monitoring manager, is engaging with Inuit youth on what type of data the observatory will capture. And it's also good to know we hire youth science ambassadors in as many regions as possible. And we have a youth science ambassador that helps sets up these meetings. That is Inuit, of course. So in Canada, coastal Indigenous have been on the front lines of ocean observing for at least 14,000 years, both through lived experience as well as the use of new and emerging technologies. Coastal Indigenous are always on the water as their livelihood depends on it. Science can't buy that time, so the value of Indigenous knowledge is crucial for comprehensive data. Here in British Columbia, the Coastal Guardian Watchmen and Indigenous fisheries play a critical role in all aspects of stewardship for coastal First Nations, ensuring resources are sustainably managed, that rules and regulations are followed, and that the land and the marine use agreements are implemented effectively. Traditional knowledge handed down from elders and traditional resource harvesters play a crucial role in ecosystem-based marine planning. Indigenous very much want to know the same ocean data as scientists, though building true partnerships with ocean And through building true partnerships with ocean organizations, Indigenous are deemed to become a powerful force in ocean data management. Traditional knowledge has guided marine planning processes in communities and at the provincial and federal level, as it is formally recognized in Canada's Oceans Act and the National Marine Conservation Areas Act. Successful collaborations between Indigenous and scientific community allow for both sides to make informed decisions. Increasingly, Indigenous communities are articulating their own priorities and are implementing change on their own terms. As the Indigenous Community Liaison for Ocean Networks Canada, I have the great pleasure of asking nations, how can I support you in ocean science and in what capacity? We get to build equal partnerships from the budget up. And it's a rare thing. I think it's a rare thing for, in my position, to be able to ask communities this. So I have the privilege of doing this, and I'm very honored to do that. The GitGat in Hartley Bay, BC are informing ONC here of where the best location would be for their community observatory. They were able to access funding through Transport Canada for tracking shipping, and we were able to match those funds. They monitor the effects of shipping on the whale populations and their precious ecosystems that feed their community. Indigenous people are undertaking their own research projects, including design, implementation, analysis, and dissemination, and using the data from research to help answer critical questions affecting their territories and interests. Collaborating with our Indigenous partnerships ensures no sacred sites or sensitive ecological areas are harmed. Also, for scientists who can only listen through numbers, partnering with Indigenous creates longer term data and less roadblocks. Pre-planning is key. Ocean Networks currently has 29 partnerships with Indigenous in various capacities and funding initiatives. And you can see we are spanning across Canada. We have some actually in the works in the East Coast now. This map doesn't show all our partnerships, as some of our partnerships are in education. We have quite an extensive education team. The shift towards increasing Indigenous control over research and data management is paired with the understanding at the highest political level that reconciliation means having a seat at the decision-making table. This is creating fundamental shifts in the status quo approach to engaging with Indigenous people. The Arctic sea ice is melting at a rate far faster than almost all climate models predicted. Ocean Networks Canada collaborated with the Inuit to monitor the changing ocean. In Cambridge Bay, Nunavut, studying sea ice processes is the key aspect of understanding climate change and its impacts on the Arctic. These elders shared their traditional ecological knowledge and spoke about losing family through the unpredictable ice, which makes it difficult every year to gather their foods especially through the beginning of the season and the end of the seasons. As Ocean Networks Canada grows, so does our learning and community engagement team, which includes the Indigenous engagement, K-12 educators, post-secondary educators, and the community monitoring team. We ensure the needs of Indigenous partners are met, and they are put in they are connected with the right experts. Our approach to collaborating with Indigenous partners varies from project to project, but what is important to us is that Indigenous partners are at the same table and have strong voice and ownership in a project. The Tsleil-Waututh, which means people of the inlet, used to source most of their food from the Broad Inlet in Vancouver. Today, the food that they used to rely upon is so heavily being impacted. They joined forces with ONC to study and eventually improve the quality of the water in the inlet. The federal government invested $1.5 million in the project to have ONC seafloor observatory installed. as well as 5 members trained full-time. The Tsleil-Waututh own their observatory 100% and contract ONC to maintain the observatory. This instrument will help us determine the quality of water flowing into the Burrard Inlet. Then we can see how it changes and know what the local contribution to pollution is. It will also be monitoring for shipping traffic. It's good to note that all our data agreements are renegotiable every year. If a nation doesn't want specific data public, the agreement can be amended. From September 16th to the 20th, 2019, the Global Ocean Conference, Ocean Obs 19, took place in Honolulu, Hawaii. For the first time, an Indigenous Ocean Governance Forum was a central part of the Ocean Obs 19 conference. Let that soak in for a moment. The first time. With support from ONC, 53 Indigenous delegates from Canada, the United States, Pacific Islands, and New Zealand attended to build relationships among observers and Indigenous communities and to support and strengthen ocean stewardship and ocean governance. The Indigenous delegation had 2 primary goals: to influence how Western science views and understands Indigenous ways of knowing, capacities, strengths, and needs with regards to ocean observation in the coming decade, and to advance the direct participation of coastal Indigenous peoples in ocean observing relevant to ocean governments in the next 10 years. The Indigenous delegation worked together to collectively attend as many sessions as possible to ensure that an Indigenous voice was heard and proper Indigenous engagement and needs took place. The delegation also held a town hall. The goal: began identifying ocean observing priorities of coastal Indigenous peoples over the next decade in relation to the themes of Ocean Obs 19. Share successful practices for establishing meaningful partnerships with Indigenous communities, organizations, and nations for observing, and highlight priorities for ocean information needs, emerging methodologies, and identify gaps in strengthening capacity for Indigenous-led research and partnerships. Key messages that emerged from the panel were: researchers should think partnerships, not participation, when involving Indigenous communities in their projects. More information must flow into communities from researchers visiting to ensure that Indigenous communities benefit from the research being done. They also talked about how they no longer want to see their knowledge taken without properly being consulted and credited in scientific papers. And this is a very common thing that has been said. A coastal Indigenous Peoples Declaration, the Aha Hanua, was developed during the week of Ocean Obs 19 and presented on the last day of the conference. Hanua means world in Hawaiian. Oops. In the declaration, the Indigenous coastal communities calls on the ocean observing community to establish meaningful partnerships with Indigenous communities, organizations, and nations to learn and respect each other's ways of knowing, design, develop, and carry out ocean observing initiatives, share responsibilities and resources. In this picture is the Pieter, and the Pieter is a Hawaiian gift made from coconut strands and was given to the Canadian delegation to symbolize how strong the 53-member delegation is when bonded. Now imagine the strength of the partnerships we can build around the world from coast to coast. That is a strong connection that will only deliver the best data for all to make the best decisions for the next generations. And CIOOS can be another platform for Indigenous data, which in turn can help us better understand our changing oceans. Indigenous participation needs to be at the forefront of important international initiatives such as the Commonwealth Blue Charter and the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. ONC is committed to pursuing ongoing funding and support to further coordinate efforts that enhance this mission. Thank you for joining my presentation today. You know, much of this information I feel could be it's common sense, but it has to be in the 21st century echoed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peter. Great presentation. And we now have time for a couple questions, but I wanted to share something that Stan Oliver put into the chat. Stan is with the Nunatuavut Community Council, and Stan shared that Silas is an Inuit word which means everything is connected, the trees, the animals, the fish, the waters, the rocks, the oceans, the people. Thus, it is crucially important to include all knowledge and incorporate in making vital decisions. So we have a question from Kelsey Leonard. Thank you, Peter. You mentioned you have received consent from Indigenous nations for placement of the observatory tools and systems. I believe you specifically mentioned this is the case for the Neptune observatory system. Can you describe the protocol by which consent from First Nations is achieved? Are there formal consent agreements that are signed inclusive of data sharing agreements?
Neptune is before my time, so Neptune was one of the original observatories. So I was not part of that, but on the map it recognizes the Nuu-chah-nulth in that regard. We usually, but in regards to consent, we if it's not directly related in a partnership, then I guess it could be consent, but we really rather go beyond consent and have it start with a true partnership, start from the discussion, the ideas, and go up from there, as opposed to go down or into just being a last thought kind of thing. So I was not part of the, that was in the original years, I think in 2006 when Neptune was in place. So I don't know all the details there, but I know they're aware of it. And we also provide training on our Oceans 2.0 to any of the nations in these areas, or if we're in their nations, we try to provide training and support so they can access all the information as well for their needs.
Kelsey says, thank you. Any other questions for Peter?
Can I just clarify something? It's Chantal from Ocean Networks Canada as well. I'm one of the people who help implement the data agreements. So there is a formal agreement that we do pursue with each community partner, and it does specify the ownership of the data as well as the instruments and everything like that. So we do respect the OCAP and ownership and self-determination. So just wanted to clarify.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments following Peter's presentation? Feel free to unmic yourself and talk into your mic or pop it into the chat.
Say Shelley was also part of the delegation there, and she presented as well at Ocean Obs 19. And, you know, it was really just a small discussion. It was peripheral, and really the next 10 years is kind of the meat of it. And really, you know, I think we're all wondering what that's going to be. And we have to keep our networks going to ensure that that these conferences have Indigenous, you know, at the table, that scientists understand they need to have Indigenous at the table. What I found from Ocean Obs 19 is that around a lot of places around the world aren't necessarily always advanced as we are in Canada, even though we really have a long way to go. But that just really puts, like, from what we heard from our American friends, that it's not the case. They're not being asked to be at the table at all. And I would love to see examples where they are, but just from our experience of that. And then, of course, the delegation was only focused on the Pacific Islands, and we would love to have a bigger delegation down the road, maybe for the next one. And also the Indigenous, you know, being for the first time being brought to such a conference as a last kind of almost I find kind of a last thought in a way, and it was good that we had our voice there. Just speaks volumes that Indigenous are not being even invited to these conferences, or it's a last thought. You know, I was snubbed quite a bit at the Ocean Obs 19 when in some of our social gatherings from scientists, and so there's a community out there who really don't seem to care, and hopefully we're changing that slowly with webinars and all these things, you know. And I'm not an expert. I'm always learning. I'm always learning from our friends, and you know, and it's a real, it's all of us together that's going to get there.
Thank you very much, Peter. And there are some comments in the chat box there too that please do everyone get a chance to look at that. And I see, Albert, that you have your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes, my question is, from the global communities, what more can we do? What more can be said to amplify our voices? That we are in fact very, very serious when we voice our concerns as to how our Mother Earth is being treated. I wish I had an answer, but I believe if we can somehow find a way how to connect those little dots that separate us globally, that the multinationals and the government, which is one anyway, they're speaking of one voice, would have no other alternative but to listen to us. Because right now, because of the numbers and because of the way we are scattered globally, they feel not only we do not have a clout, but they feel they don't have to listen to us because we just are so few. So again, the question is, what must we do to amplify our voices, to convey the message that we are very, very serious of sharing that message globally, that there needs to be some actions taken now before we get to a point of no return. Thank you.
Thank you, Albert. Peter, do you want to respond to that? And then Anya Waite has her hand up too.
I mean, I think really kind of said it in his question. I mean, we get there together, and we have to keep the checks and balances going forward. And thanks to OCAP, thanks to local contexts and care that, you know, these principles are in place to try to mitigate how scientists are conducting their ways of today. But we need to be more, we have to be at these conferences to really keep our voice out there. You know, I would hate to see us be swept under the rug again and just like, you know, why do we need you for ocean science, or, you know. So yeah, it's a big broad question. Globally, connecting the dots is doing what we're already doing with initiatives like this. And many of our organizations are doing this now here in Canada, which is great. And with the whole indigenization of everything is great, but it has to be with intent. It has to be from the heart, and all these just like an acknowledgement. The research has to be in place. You know, when you're dealing with nations, you have to do your research thoroughly to understand who you're working with, so you can speak with intent and speak from your heart, and your actions will follow from your heart. And this is one thing that, you know, scientists can sometimes be better at, You know, they're not always the most people, you know, they're very brainiacs, but they're not always the best communicators. So, but it could be better, that type of engagement. One of the biggest things that stood out of the conference was, it could be as simple as a story. Is tell me a story, tell me who you are before you come in with your PowerPoint presentation, or you fly in. I want to know for a day who you are. That is a gift to me. Then that's a first sign of engagement. It doesn't have to be a physical gift, it could be a story. Let's get to know who you are before you start saying this and that, and you want this and that. You know, that's the first step.
Thanks, Peter. Anya, would you like to share something?
Sure, just gonna take down my hand. First of all, I've been really moved by the discussions over the last few workshops. I've really enjoyed listening and thinking about what I'm hearing and learning. I think there are actually two things we can do. One is they're both possible in a kind of an institutional context, and one we can just do and the other we have to work together for. And the first one is kind of modest, and that's training our students, making some kind of awareness and understanding of Indigenous culture and concerns a mandatory part of what we train our students with. And for example, the Ocean Frontier Institute in our graduate program, it's mandatory for a certain, at least baseline level of understanding to be taught to graduate students. And I think that's just a basic thing, and it means that over a long time, in the next generation of scientists will have had that training. They'll have heard stories, they'll know more about how they need to communicate and what are the issues that they need to think about. And that's something that our institute feels really very strongly about. And we've also spent the last year and a half building what we're calling an Indigenous engagement guide, which is something that, and we've been working with our a group of Indigenous colleagues, some of whom are on this call, where we're trying to make it absolutely clear to researchers the cultures and the complexities that they're dealing with, when even this is just for mostly Mi'kmaq, but also in Northern Labrador. So that's sort of at the institutional level. Those are things we can do right now. And so we will continue to do that. And we would really love to hear more from you about what we can do more and better. And we have our Indigenous Steering Committee, which gives us excellent advice, but we're always open to more conversations. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think we need to act under the UN decade. And one of the things we noticed when the Ocean Frontier Institute hosted the North Atlantic workshop for the UN decade about a year ago, and we had small but significant Indigenous representation and they spoke up, stepped up to the microphone and really spoke their stories. And it changed fundamentally the meeting. We had traditional Western scientists throwing away their notes and speaking from the heart in that meeting. So you could feel the movement. It was small, but it was really significant. And I think that we haven't done enough yet to push under the UN decade that Indigenous concerns be taken seriously. And I am happy to help with this. There are the first set of programs under the UN decade have already gone in, but there's another 10 years to go. So I think we need to act together on this and have conversations where we say, how do we put these agendas in front of the global community clearly and incontrovertibly so they move forward? So that's the second one. It's a much bigger ask and it requires a lot more conversation nationally. And that's a place where I'm happy to see what I can do to put these concerns and to put this agenda item very, very clearly in front of the UN decade. And I think this is a place where, maybe it is very European centered at this point. I would say that's something we're all very, very concerned about. And we need to push for a broader consideration of other worldviews, and to really braid Indigenous knowledge and Western traditional science together going forward. So those two opportunities, those two actions, I'm happy to commit to.
Thank you very much for your commitment. So thank you, Pieter, for your presentation. We're going to move on to the third speaker now.
Before you move on there,
yes, please.
Before you move on there, can I share something?
Please
First
go ahead.
of all, Pieter, that was a very impressive, awesome presentation, and you know, the lady before spoke as well, Alana. You know, you're thinking about, you know, working together, you know, based on respect. You know, respect and acknowledgement, and being inclusive. You know, because I guess as human beings, we all have, as we spoke earlier on about, you know, we have some common interests here, and you know, to me, that presentation that Pieter just did is very unique, not unique in a way, but when you think about taking the traditional knowledge and utilizing the Western knowledge and combine them together, that's an example of what, you know, the elder Marshall speaks of two white seeing, and that everything should be always based on respect and mutual respect, and more so about being more inclusive for and a place for Indigenous knowledge also to partner up with the Western knowledge. So thank you for sharing out. It was a real awesome presentation, Pieter. Thank you. Thanks, Christina, for allowing me to share.
Thank you.
So we do have a fantastic question from Darren, but I would like to in the chat, I would like to go on to our third speaker. I believe, Darren, your question may be relevant to a final discussion. So I do intend to get to it, time providing. So thank you for putting that in there. And Pieter and the other guest speakers, perhaps you could make note of Darren's question in the event that we don't get time to come to that. So now we are coming to our third and final presentation of the discussion series. And our final guest speakers are Jane Anderson and Maui Hudson, and they are bringing an international perspective to this conversation. So Jane Anderson is an associate professor at New York University and global fellow in the Engelberg Center for Innovation Law and Policy, the Law School of NYU. For the last 20 years, Jane has been working for and with Indigenous communities to find, access, control, and regain authority and ownership of Indigenous cultural and intellectual property collections and data within universities, libraries, museums, and archives. Jane is co-founder of Local Context, which delivers traditional knowledge and biocultural labels and notices. Presenting with Jane will be Maui Hudson. Maui is an associate professor with the Te Kotahi Research Institute at the University of Waikato in New Zealand. Maui supports Maori to engage in the research sector, including through Te Ahu o Rehua, a network for cross-cultural ocean knowledge that connects expertise across the fields of climate change, marine science, ocean health, voyaging, and non-instrument navigation. Maui and Jane are both co-founders of ENRICH, which stands for Equity for Indigenous Research and Innovation Coordinating Hub, a joint initiative between the University of Waikato and New York University. So welcome, Jane and Maui. The microphone is yours.
Oh, thank you so much. Let me just share my screen.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. My name's Jane. I'm joining you from Mannahatta, from the Lenape-Hoking, the lands of the Lenape nations. I would like to begin by acknowledging the ancestors and the elders and paying my respects to the future and emerging leaders of these lands and waters. I just want to thank Katherine for the welcome today, as well as Christina for hosting this event, and to all the panelists who've spoken over the last couple of weeks. Really been amazing to be part of such learning and such teachings. I especially also want to thank Elder Albert and Elder Edward Burley for guiding us, grounding us, and challenging us to think about what collaborative action around protecting the oceans can be.
And kia ora koutou, me kia koutou tēnei ata. My name's Maui Hudson, and I'm a member of the Whakatohia Nation, which is a tribe on the east coast of the North Island of New Zealand. Just also want to acknowledge some connections. One of the members of our tribe, Kimberly Maxwell, was a part of the Ocean Observation, part of the Indigenous delegation, and brought messages from that important event back home to our community. And we've been actively involved in a collaboration with marine scientists around a project around ocean modeling and marine heat waves. And as we've been thinking about how we bring traditional knowledge into that project and collaboration, we've been thinking about what sorts of tools can inform that. But I did also want to just acknowledge the learnings that we have, that we get from Canada. And when I first started doing work around research ethics, there was some Mi'kmaq principles and protocols from the Mi'kmaq Ethics Watch. That was one of the first kind of documents that was talking about what good research looked like. And then particularly thinking around the interface between Indigenous knowledge and science, and the work of people like Willie Irvine with the ethical space, and of course Alda Marshall with the two-eyed seeing is something that's informed the way that we've been thinking about things down here in Aotearoa as well. So kia ora. And I think it's in some ways it's important that this slide speaks a little bit to this question that was in the chat around data ownership. And it's really that we've been having these conversations about the differences between like owning the land or this sort of property right in relation to the lands and the oceans. And that when we're talking about it, we're usually talking about our responsibilities and wanting to reflect those responsibilities. And so, you know, there's this question arises as we're generating more data through research projects, is not one of ownership, but one of responsibility. And what does it mean to be responsible, you know, responsible to the data in the same way as we talk about being responsible to the land or responsible to the ocean?
So one of the things, our main kind of point of talking to you guys today is really thinking about tools that can support collaborations and tools that can support partnerships and the responsibility and obligation towards Indigenous data into the future. This project with the traditional knowledge labels is developed over a 10-year period in partnership with Indigenous communities in Canada, the United States, Australia and New Zealand. And really the TK labels could be understood as digital tags that reflect Indigenous protocols around the sharing of knowledge. It's largely was developed as a response to certain kinds of legal exclusions, the way in which Indigenous communities have been excluded from areas of law like intellectual property law, where they don't own collections or don't own materials within institutional contexts, and trying to find a way to build Indigenous protocols back into metadata, back into the metadata that sits within these collections, within these cataloguing, within these archive, library, museum, repository contexts. So there are over this period of time, we've developed 18 traditional knowledge labels, and they reflect a range of protocols from being named and the right to be named within a work and within kind of collections, to more nuance around seasonal responsibilities and obligations that might exist around particular kinds of collections and data, and also identifying where there's kind of cultural sensitivities that might also be in relationship to collections or data. This is an example of the TK labels being used by the Scowlitz Band of the Stolo First Nation in British Columbia. What you'll see is that the icon for the labels that I showed you before remains stable. It was part of the dimension of this project that requires international recognition of the system and for uptake within institutions internationally, whilst pivoting around the right that every community has to define those terms in their own way within their own language. So this is the customization. Every community customizes their labels, their set of labels, so they're distinct to each community. And this is the attribution label for the Scowlitz, Swiksquas Tek Tamuk in Halkomelem, and you can kind of see what this is a space where the community is really able to describe why and how they're using the labels and kind of for what purpose, and that often speaks to history, it speaks to politics, it speaks to bringing community names back into the forefront of how these materials should be looked after and cared for into the future. One of the kind of key interesting parts of this project is how it works to transform digital infrastructures. This is a project with the Passamaquoddy tribe in Maine to bring the rights and responsibilities back into the digital infrastructure at the Library of Congress. This was a significant project over a 5-year period where Passamaquoddy were able to connect back to 1890 sound recordings that had not been returned to the community, and then also add their rights and interests at a Dublin core level. And here you'll see that the Library of Congress has initiated a standard where Passamaquoddy rights are recognised within the rights field of the Dublin core. This is unusual in the sense that it's largely been held for legal rights holders. This is kind of no longer the case once this standard is operationalised at the Library of Congress, which it is now. You're muted, Maui. Can't hear you.
Sorry.
There you go.
So there's work around the traditional knowledge labels have been focused on cultural heritage, cultural knowledge, and some of the work that I've been involved with was around our rights and interests in relation to genetic resources, and sort of independent of associated traditional knowledge. And so we have these challenges around, in a similar way, how those things get recognized in gene sequences emerging from Indigenous flora and fauna, how you, in a similar way, need to collaborate around ethical access and use, but in ways consistent with existing community protocols, and how by maintaining that relationship between the community and the data, that allows you to position for negotiating equitable outcomes should future uses lead to some sort of commercial outcome. And that's where we've utilized the same model as with the traditional knowledge labels and developed a set of biocultural labels to reflect things like the relationship, the provenance of where the samples have come from, whether or not consent, or how consent has come about, and can verify that that's in place, and then indicate what sorts of uses into the future look like. And so research use is okay, but there's a desire to be connected into future uses, either through collaboration or commercialization. And so the labels follow the same format. We're trying to set them up so there's a way of understanding what the use of the label is for, and then developing some template texts that that relate to the labels too. And part of the development of the biocultural labels is trying to align these ideas of cultural rights and the tagging with what will then be legal instruments operating within the international context. And so expectations in the Nagoya Protocol around access and benefit sharing, we could use the labels to align to the different components of that agreement, from demonstrating free, prior, and informed consent to mutually agreed terms, and what kinds of things support. They don't say what the benefit sharing is, but support benefit sharing negotiations taking place.
So what's really important about the labels is that only communities can develop the labels. They're not for researchers to develop or institutions to develop. They're solely and their authority comes from community development. But as we developed this project, we understood that there's also tools that institutions and researchers need to help identify very early on in the research project that there is traditional knowledge, that there is biocultural interests that need to be part of any kind of data moving into the future. That's why we developed the biocultural and the traditional knowledge notice. For institutions, we also understand that institutions also are very connected to their collections. They often know them very well, and this kind of work that is the invisible labor that communities have to connect back to their collections and institutions often could be ameliorated to some extent by institutions actually stepping up to acknowledge how they want to collaborate, in what kinds of conditions they want to collaborate, and that their collections actually have, where the collections are missing information and missing Indigenous protocols for how that should be cared for into the future. So these are distinct, the notices are distinct and are just for institutions and for researchers to collaborate and to create different kinds of pathways for equitable engagement with communities. You're muted again.
Sorry, I keep muting because my kids are having breakfast. So the traditional knowledge labels have been developed alongside communities over the past 10 years. And we're just really moving into the phase of the development of the biocultural labels, as well as trying to get a system or the local context redeveloped so it can deal with implementation at larger scales. And so that work is underway. There's a question about whether it's machine readable yet. So the intention is that each of the labels will have, or each community set of labels will have a unique identifier, which means that you can kind of track it across multiple projects and multiple institutions, wherever they may appear around the world. That development is underway. We're hoping to have that ready for beta testing by the end of this month. So that's been slightly delayed, but where it's still underway. And so you'll see here, this would be, each community would have their own space. Whakatoa here, this is my community. We're about to engage in a project with the National Sound and Film Archive to digitally repatriate copies of all of the material they hold from our community. And we'll apply labels to all the versions of that material that were going to remain in the archive, so that people can see what our protocols are and preferences around how it should be used. And then we're in a position to, through our own digital library, use it to create content in the way that we would want to do it ourselves, including, we've just developed a song app, an app of traditional songs.
So I think what's interesting about this project to some extent is it stretches from kind of cultural heritage or songs and photographs and language materials that might have historically been collected that Indigenous communities have difficulty accessing and asserting their authority over, into these kinds of spaces around genetic resources and data, and kind of what that kind of spaces that are moving into the future. And so it raises this interesting question about kind of what is the value of labeling data. And through the kind of work that Maui and I have been doing, we've kind of really identified the labels have a certain kind of taxonomy. The priority is around provenance, making sure that where data comes from, when data comes from Indigenous lands and waters, that's with the data from the very beginning, and meeting and how they function as expressions of Indigenous data sovereignty. So we have the provenance taxonomy, we have a protocols taxonomy, and we have a permissions taxonomy. But I think what's interesting about data labeling is that in machine learning contexts, data labeling is a process of identifying raw data and adding meaningful information and kind of providing context so that a machine learning model can learn from it. And so our proposition really is, what does it look like? What would it mean to have machine learning that can predict when data has come and has Indigenous rights and interests as part of it? How would that change how Indigenous interests are recognised, and what kinds of equitable outcomes can be developed over time? And we think that the TK and the BC labels are working to support that kind of model training to predict data that does have Indigenous rights and interests.
And so this is an example of some of the material that's coming forward in our project, which is one with it's the Moana project, working alongside Net Service. We have brought forward some of our traditional knowledge through traditional chants that refer to, significant sites along our coastlines. And this is relevant in the context of understanding marine heat waves and the effect of climate change on our traditional practices, but also our commercial interests, which are operating in the same space, as we've got an offshore aquaculture farm. And here we're using the traditional knowledge labels to reflect that this chant is connected to our community. It's been verified as correct, but is actually for community use only, and when it's been used in that traditional form. However, the points that are referenced within it, we're wanting to have information about that from a traditional knowledge point of view sit alongside the science information that emerges about those same spaces. And here's an example of another component of the project, which is thinking about genetic connectivity of species. And so our aquaculture interest around mussels, we're developing an offshore mussel farm, and we're interested in what the genetics of that mussels is, where the spat is coming from. And so we're sampling mussels from across the whole region, which is from areas involved with a number of different communities. So we're engaging at a cultural level in conversations with them about what that relationship looks like. But as that data is generated and those gene sequences are generated, we're thinking about what sorts of biocultural labels will apply to that information.
So that we're going to end it there. That was a kind of a fast go through on the labels. Thanks so much for listening to that.
Thank you very much, Jane and Maui. Fantastic presentation. So the chat has been very busy as you were presenting, and Maui, you have already touched on one of the questions that was raised about whether aspects of the label are machine readable. And it sounds like that's still to come. Is that correct? Would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, it's part of the development of the hub that is happening at the moment. So yes, the plan is for them to be machine readable. I can see Raina's question there from when we talked a little bit last year, and that is exactly as the Creative Commons licenses are machine readable. The TK labels and BC labels are machine readable in the same way.
Okay, great. I'm just keeping an eye here on the chat. There's some good discussion going on here about international ocean best practices system. That would be very, Anya Waite has presented this comment that the international ocean best practices system would be very interested in the labeling protocol, and would be great to lodge a description of your approach to the best practices system, and she's happy to help with that. Raina agrees. There's some back and forth there that you can tune into there. Does anyone have would you like to speak to any of that conversation, Jane or Maui, or shall I open it up to anyone else for comment?
Maybe Maui could speak a little bit to Kelsey's comment, because I think that's a really important one.
Right, which one was that?
So I'll just make a couple of comments. There's certainly a number of conversations that are going on, and there's sort of layers to how all this comes about. The traditional knowledge labels acts as a tool which supports discussions other people are having about Indigenous data sovereignty or Indigenous data governance. And so we're involved in discussions with various networks, and increasingly networks that are associated with territories and observational data related to earth science or the oceans, which has been a really interesting development because a lot of the initial focus around data sovereignty was around sort of administrative data and access into that space. And the interest and shift into land information is a really fascinating one. So part of it is thinking about the policy framework and how, say, the CARE principles for Indigenous data governance can be used, and they're all emerging sort of policy frameworks which people are having to feel through what it actually looks like in practice. And so there's different discussions with people like open traditional ecological knowledge that are thinking about how they can make use of or reflect the CARE principles through their data management processes and practices. And the TK and the BC labels as a tool that supports that sort of activity, you know, alongside other tools that are being created and being developed or in place in different areas.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Jane or Maui? We had a comment. I'm just wondering, Albert, it looked like you were trying to unmute yourself there. We had a comment earlier on from Darren, which I think may still be relevant to the conversation, to your presentation, Jane and Maui. And let me just pull that up here. Where did it go? So how much do you think data ownership and or treating data as a commodity restricts making real change to protect the waters and the life within?
I mean, I think that's such an important question. And I think one of the things that we are trying to move away from with the labels is to move outside of a property paradigm. And the logics of a property paradigm that do exactly as Darren says, the commodity restricts a certain kind, or it creates a different kind of logic that is already always an exclusionary one. And what does it look like to think about this as around responsibility, obligation, and in a different kind of way outside of a property model?
Albert, would you like to make a point or comment here?
Yes, I do. Thank you very much. I apologize for taking up so much time. But anyway, but I'm wondering is that how many actually people truly believe that we have exhausted the carrying capacity of our system, that we have actually exhausted the cleansing capacity of our system, especially our waters? And do we need more scientific data to prove that we in fact have exhausted those capacities? And I do know that no one knows exactly when that point of no return will be. But who wants to find out when that will come? So I think, you know, to amplify our voices, we have to be talking more in a practical terms, because the scientific aspect of it, the government is not going to listen to it unless we get the people to listen. Oh, hopefully only then the government and the multinationals will be compelled to do and to move things and to do things differently. This is not a doom and gloom. This is a reality, in my humble opinion, that I don't believe we need more science to tell us our system has been exhausted. Our system has reached beyond the cleansing capacity. So what more can be said before someone will take some actions? And the action is going to be required global action, not a regional or a national issue. Thank you.
Maui or Jane, would you like to respond to Albert's comment?
I think, yes, look, I'll just say I think it's probably sort of the general summary one, but certainly from what I see down here in New Zealand at times is that people don't want to make a decision, and so they ask for more information and science. And when they get the results of that study out, you're still stuck with the hard decision. It's just you got more information, doesn't make the decision any easier. And so decisions that have to be made about things like that just need to be made. Often some of the sort of observational sort of monitoring data is really useful for management decisions, but not for these kind of larger, I don't know what you call them, sort of strategic or directional kind of decisions.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm keeping an eye on our time here because I want to be respectful to everyone's, what else others have got on the go today. So we are going to go a little bit over. Are there any, is there one more question for Jane or Maui before I move things to the next stage of the discussion? I think Kelsey had made the point about the power of this project is the operationalization that has occurred by Indigenous nations for the protection of their data, as evidenced by the Maruhia Ata example. Was there anything you wanted to add to that or clarify?
I think we're seeing from a range of communities that there's, even though it doesn't provide a legal protection, what it does is it provides, it makes really transparent your relationship with those data sets. And particularly as when that information is now sitting on an open platform somewhere which anyone else can access. And so it's not necessarily the researcher you've worked with in the kind of collaborative sense, because often you would have had the conversations about what that looks like. It's actually how do you maintain that, or how do you reflect those agreements or those discussions for other people that are just coming to the data and not coming to the community. And I think that's where I see the value of this project sitting.
Well, thank you, Jane and Maui, very much for your presentation. A lot of ground covered, and I look forward to more conversations. It sounds like from the looking at the chat, those relationships have been established between our neck of the planet and yours, and I look forward to continue to build on those. So a round of applause, please, for Jane and Maui and for all of our fantastic guest speakers today. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I would like to provide a couple closing remarks before I turn things over to Katherine and possibly Elder Albert or Elder Edward to provide some closing remarks. So thank you again to our guest speakers for your wonderful presentations, and thank you to everyone who attended for listening and contributing to the discussion, whether simply by your presence, listening and learning in the chat, or with your voice. So thank you very much. I did want to thank Patricia Solis, the Executive Director of the Maliseet Nation Conservation Council, who was very instrumental in helping me and my other colleagues at CIOOS Atlantic to redesign our discussion series to make it less to challenge my classic comfortable way of approaching this kind of conversation and to open it up much more in a different way. So thank you to Patricia. Thank you to Mary Jane Prue, our fantastic research assistant, who kicked things off with her fantastic literature review and who has been very generous with her time in helping us shape this discussion series. Thank you very much to Katherine Martin for providing the heart and the continuity and for your wonderful voice and everything that it imparts to us wherever we are on this planet. Thank you very much to the Ocean Frontier Institute and Canada's Ocean Supercluster for providing funding for this discussion series. And thank you very much to Elder Albert Marshall and Elder Edward Purley for joining us throughout this discussion and for the conversations that I've had with you in between all these conversations. I know that I can speak for everyone here how much we value your presence and what you've shared with us. So in terms of next steps, the CIOOS Atlantic team will be working with our fantastic Pisces, our research management project management team that has helped coordinate this discussion series with us. We're going to be summarizing what we heard over the course of the discussion series and boiling that all down into a document that we're going to be sharing back with you. And if we hope that there will be certain items that emerge from that process of synthesizing everything that was shared over these 3 sessions that will suggest some next steps. And I think we've heard some very powerful commitments today that we will be documenting, and perhaps they will provide something that allows us to determine collaboratively where we can go from here. So stay tuned for that. We will hope to get that out to you in the next couple weeks so that it stays fresh and we can keep the momentum. Kieran, would you like to take a moment here now just to share your offer? Or would you like to wait for another time for that? Would you like?
Sure, I can take that.
Okay, please do.
Yeah. Sorry. Alrighty. So I'm from Pisces Research Project Management. I'm Kieran Swanson. I just wanted to tell you about an offer that we have going on for volunteer proposal writing services. Pisces is available to help at all stages of your project or just when you need a little bit of help at a particular stage. So a little bit about Pisces. Pisces Research Project Management is a research and development project management company specifically focused on ocean projects. And we like to maintain honest and transparent and fun relationships with our clients as well as our volunteer clients. And one of the things that I wanted to go over today is just that we are here to help. So during COVID, we noticed that some organizations have better access to funding than others, and we want to help by donating $10,000 in proposal writing services to a community organization who would not otherwise be able to access these services. The only thing is that these proposals must be oceans focused. If you're interested in this opportunity or want to learn a little bit more about it, please feel free to contact us at piscesrpm@piscesrpm.com. Thank you.
Thanks, Kieran. So now I would like to turn it over to Katherine Martin to help close this discussion series more formally. Katherine, are you there?
I am.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Before we close, I will sing a closing song that I wrote myself about the oceans. And but before that, I just would like to ask Albert and Ed to give us a closing. That's it.
Can I pass it on to my friend from New Brunswick?
All right, we're gonna let Ed.
This is a collective effort.
Yeah, we're gonna let Ed send that part off because he's along that St. John River Valley, the Great River. Is that true or no? So, yeah, how's that river down there? What's happening there? Full of ice?
Cruising right now, yeah.
Cool.
Well, first of all, just want to thank Patricia Salas for asking me to be a part of this gathering. Who put me in contact with Christina, and I want to thank Christina for asking me if I'd be a part of this gathering or the series they call them. And thank you very much. And I want to thank our elder Albert Marshall as well for his participation, and want to thank Kathy for all the wonderful songs and prayers that she shared with us over the last 3 meetings. And to everybody else, I just want to thank you all for allowing me to be a part of this series and to be able to share what little knowledge that I have. You know, I didn't think I had any at the beginning, but the more I thought about it, and you know, the more I listened, you know, this is a global concern, and you know, it affects all human species of life, and you know, and we always think about the human, how it affects the humans, but you know, hardly ever giving consideration to the species that live and utilize the water, you know, the sacred water. The water also has the life in it within itself to sustain, you know, these species that rely on, you know, for survival and existence. And it's not only the species, but also the human species as well that rely on, you know, these elements, you know. So I think that, you know, again, by respect, you know, having respect for one another, and respect for all life that exists here in this beautiful womb we call Mother Earth, the Earth. Again, it's been a pleasure and an honor, and I'd just like to say, Waliwin, Walalin, merci beaucoup, and thank you. And again, to each and every one of you out there, if nobody told you today that anybody loves you, I just want to share my love and extend my love to each and every one of you out there. Thank you.
Well, Alden. I found the whole series to be very hopeful. And I think many of us have been at this around the world for a long time, trying to connect the science world or the academia with traditional knowledge. And I was just so taken when Shelley and her team, the panel, came on and spoke. And I said, that's what we have prayed for and asked for, to have people like Shelley and Alana and the others to get the education and bring it back so that we can speak in both worlds and we can participate. So I thought, like, I was just amazed, but I thought UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on Indigenous Rights, and the recent reconciliation, the TRC here in Canada, the Truth and Reconciliation, there are very good calls to action and laws under UNDRIP that I believe if we all take a look at them, we will find the type of power and authority that we need to move these recommendations, all the thoughts people had, to move it to a level higher than where we're at, and that would be into law. We already have UNDRIP. We already have the TRC calls to action here, and I'm sure there's others around the world. So if we all do this, everybody pays attention and looks at it, there might be a way that we could work a little closer and harder at doing what we're all doing. So this is my last course when I was doing my master's along the Parsboro shore, and some of you might know that shore around the world because it's famous. So I sang this, I made this because I had to put in a creative writing piece, and this is what came. Away, oh hey, away, oh hi, hey yo, away. Away, oh, hey, 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 away, oh, hey, hey, when an elder dies, a child is born. And the moon, she will rise o'er the setting sun, and she'll move the ocean tides with the power of her mind. A new day breaks o'er the horizon as night sky fades into the rising sun, and life, she goes on, and time heals the pain. Away, oh, hey, away, oh, hey, hey, oh, away, oh, hey, 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 away, oh, hey, 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 away, oh, hey, 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 away, oh, hey, hey. Well, Aliok, and thanks to our ancestors for joining us for this series, and we'll call upon them again.